In Montreal, they say the St. Lawrence River swallows secrets better than any priest. But nobody warned Sloane Mercer that the biggest secret she'd ever stumble into would be sitting quietly in her hospital break room, eating a stolen granola bar at 2 in the morning, wearing a coat that cost more than her monthly rent. Sloane had been a nursing aide at Hôtel Dieu de Montréal for 3 years. Not a nurse, an aide. The distinction mattered to the billing department, to her paycheck, and to exactly no one else at 3 in the morning when a patient needed turning or a bed needed changing or a grown man needed someone to hold his hand while he cried. She did the work. She just didn't get the title. She was 26 years old, and she was tired in the particular way that only people who carry other people's weight understand. Her grandmother, Nana Bet, was 4 floors up in the oncology ward, which was either a terrible coincidence or the universe's idea of a dark joke. Sloane had taken the job partly for the proximity, partly for the staff discount on parking, mostly because the alternatives were worse. The boy appeared on a Wednesday in February. That was how Sloane would always remember it. Not a name, not a face at first. Just a Wednesday, and the cold that came in through the automatic doors of the pediatric wing with him, cutting straight through her thin scrubs. He was 7 years old, maybe 8, small for his age, with dark hair that needed cutting and enormous grey eyes that seemed to be doing calculations behind them, constantly, like a little machine that never switched off. He wore a navy pea coat and proper leather shoes, not the sneakers every other kid in the ward owned. He sat in the chair outside room 14, with his hands folded in his lap like a miniature adult waiting for a job interview. Not a father. Sloane could tell immediately. The man had the restless, checking energy of someone paid to be somewhere, not someone who wanted to be there. He was wide through the shoulders, with a jaw like a shovel, and he sat with his phone in one hand and his knee bouncing in a way that suggested he found hospitals personally offensive. Sloane was rolling her medication cart past when she noticed the boy was staring at the vending machine at the end of the hallway, not casually, with the focused, miserable intensity of someone doing the math on whether they were allowed to want something. She stopped her cart. "You hungry?" The boy looked at her, then at the man. The man didn't look up from his phone. The boy looked back at Sloane and gave the smallest, most controlled shrug she had ever seen on a child. It wasn't the shrug of a kid being coy. It was the shrug of a kid who had learned very carefully not to ask for things. Sloane fished in her scrub pocket, found a granola bar she'd been saving for her own break, and held it out, la note, "Made in Quebec." She smiled. "So technically it's patriotic to eat it." The boy looked at the granola bar for a long moment. Then, with the gravity of someone accepting something important, he reached out and took it. He didn't rip it open immediately the way most kids would. He held it with both hands and nodded at her, a small formal nod, like a thank you that had learned to survive without words. "I'm Sloane," she said. He held her gaze. Then he opened his mouth, and she thought he might speak. Instead, he looked back down at the granola bar. She didn't push. She just smiled and moved her cart along, and when she glanced back from the nurse's station, he was eating it in careful, deliberate bites, watching the hallway with those grey eyes. She found out his name was Theo from the chart. No last name listed in the system, which was unusual. His admission papers had a corporate address instead of a residential one, which was very unusual. His attending physician was a doctor, Priya Nair, who was polite but vague when Sloane asked questions, which told her everything she needed to know about the instructions Dr. Nair had received regarding disclosure. Theo was in for what the chart listed as observation and management of treatment-resistant anxiety symptoms. Sloane, who had spent 3 years in this building, understood that to mean a child with something wrong that the adults in his life hadn't figured out yet. He came back 3 times that week. Not as a patient, as a visitor, sitting in that same chair outside room 14, while whoever was in room 14 received whatever treatment they received. Each time, the same big man with the shovel jaw and the impatient knee. Each time, Theo with his folded hands and his calculating eyes. Each time, Sloane found a reason to walk that corridor. By Thursday, she was bringing 2 granola bars. By Friday, she had worked out that he liked the ones with chocolate chips and tolerated the ones without. By Saturday, she had learned, through careful one-sided conversation and the reading of extremely expressive silences, that he found the vending machine humiliating because the man with him never offered him money for it, and he refused to ask. She started buying them herself. $3 a day she didn't have. She added it to the column of expenses that kept her awake between 2, 4, and 4 in the morning, which was already a long column. Nana Bette's latest scan had not been encouraging. The palliative care coordinator had started using words like comfort-focused, which Sloane had learned was hospital language for "we've done what we can." The granola bars was $3 she didn't have. She bought them anyway. On the second Wednesday, she drew a small maple leaf on the wrapper with a marker before she handed it to Theo. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small moleskin notebook and a pen that probably cost more than her hourly wage, and he drew something back. He tore the page out and handed it to her with the same formal gravity he applied to everything. It was a drawing of a stick figure in scrubs holding a plate. Stars around it. An arrow pointing to the stick figure with the word Sloane printed in careful block letters. She folded it and put it in her pocket and managed to wait until she reached the supply closet before she pressed her back against the wall and breathed through the tightening in her chest that she refused to call crying. He was lonely in a way that wasn't ordinary lonely. It was the kind of lonely that had been going on so long it had become architecture. Part of the structure of him. She didn't understand why until the Wednesday everything changed. The pediatric wing was louder than usual that morning. A group of student nurses from McGill were doing their placement rotation, and the extra bodies and the extra questions made the corridor feel smaller. Sloane was at the nurses' station filing admission paperwork when the automatic doors at the end of the hall opened, and the temperature in the room dropped by approximately 10 degrees. Not literally, but that was what it felt like. The man who walked in was not the shovel-jaw man. He was not any kind of man Sloane had a category for, which was disorienting, because she had been working in this hospital for 3 years and she had met all kinds. He was tall, not unusual. He was dressed in a dark charcoal overcoat that was tailored the way Sloane had only ever seen in films set in European cities. Not unusual either, in Montreal. What was unusual was the way the room reorganized itself around him. Not because he made any noise or gesture, because something in his bearing communicated, without aggression and without particular effort, that he was accustomed to being the most important variable in any space he entered. He had a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, faded to silver old. His hair was dark with gray at the temples. His face was the kind of face that had been very striking once and had become something harder and more interesting with age. Behind him were 2 men in dark coats, and behind them were 2 more. They filed into the pediatric ward hallway with the quiet, precise spacing of people who practiced it. The nursing staff at the station had gone very still. Theo was in his usual chair. When he saw the man, his whole body changed, not relaxing exactly, more like a small creature recognizing its habitat. The man walked straight to Theo, crouched down in front of him without any self-consciousness about the coat or the posture, and said something low that Sloane couldn't hear. Theo responded with a nod and pointed down the hallway. The man straightened. He looked at Sloane. She became very interested in the paperwork in front of her. "You're the one who's been feeding my son." His voice was quiet and unhurried, and it had the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place precisely. Quebec adjacent, but not quite. She looked up. He was standing at the station now. The 4 men in dark coats had arranged themselves with a professional casualness that positioned 2 of them between him and the doors and 2 of them near Theo. "I gave him a granola bar," Sloane said. It was maple and oat. Something moved in his expression. Not warmth. More like the careful evaluation of something unexpected. "He doesn't eat," the man said. "At home. He sits at the table and he moves things around on his plate. And I have been told by 3 separate physicians that there is nothing physiologically wrong with his swallowing or his digestion. He doesn't eat because he doesn't want to." He paused. "He ate 2 granola bars this week and asked Mrs. Renault, our housekeeper, if she knew how to make maple oat anything. Mrs. Renault was very surprised. Theo has not made a request in 14 months. Sloane put down her pen. 14 months is a long time. "Yes," the man said. "It is. Why did he stop?" The man looked at her steadily. "His mother died 15 months ago. He was with her." The air went out of the conversation. Sloane had learned, working in this building, that there was no useful response to that sentence. There was only the space you held around it. "I'm sorry," she said, "because it was true." "I'm Lucien Voss," he said, as though that were the natural next sentence. Sloane didn't know the name. She could tell from the subtle recalibration in his expression that this was both unusual and faintly refreshing. "Sloane Mercer," she said. "You've been paying for the granola bars yourself." It wasn't a question. She felt heat rise in her neck. "It's $3. It's $3 you have been spending for 11 days, Lucien Voss said, "on a child you don't know." "I know him a little," Sloane said. "He likes the ones with chocolate chips." Lucien Voss studied her for another moment. He had the disconcerting quality of making her feel she was being read very accurately and very quickly. "Your shift ends at 7, he said. "I'd like to speak with you before you leave. I have somewhere to be at 7:15. "The oncology ward," he said. "4th floor. Your grandmother, Elizabeth Mercer, room 409. "Yes." Sloane stared at him. "I know everything about people who spend time with my son," he said, with no apology in his voice. It's not personal, it's precaution. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a card on the desk. Black card, single phone number. No name. 7 o'clock, Miss Mercer. There's a family consultation room on this floor. I've arranged for it to be available. He turned and walked back to Theo. He said something else she couldn't hear. Theo glanced at her over his father's shoulder with those grey calculator eyes. Then he gave her the smallest, most serious nod she had ever received. The consultation room smelled of institutional upholstery and someone's old coffee. Sloane sat across the table from Lucien Voss and 2 of his men, who stood near the door with the stillness of people who had learned how to take up no space. "You're not in business," Sloane said, because she wanted to establish that she wasn't stupid before he started talking. "Or you're in business the way that doesn't have a LinkedIn profile." Voss's mouth curved. Not a smile. The suggestion of one. "The import and distribution of certain commodities in eastern Canada and parts of New England," he said. "The precise nature of those commodities is not relevant to this conversation. It's a little relevant to whether I'm currently in danger." "You're not," he said, "currently." She noted the qualifier. "Theo has been coming to this hospital 3 times a week," Voss continued, "because his therapist has an office on the 3rd floor. Dr. Kaminsky. Have you encountered her?" Sloane shook her head. "Theo has been seeing her for 14 months. He has not spoken a word during any session. He sits. He draws in his notebook. He leaves." Voss looked at the table surface, an unusual concession from a man whose face was otherwise controlled to the degree of a document. "He has not spoken to anyone except me since the morning his mother died. 3 words last October, to our housekeeper. 6 words to one of my security staff when he needed to report that the kitchen cat had knocked something over. He looked up. Yesterday he asked Mrs. Renaud about maple oat recipes. That is the longest sentence he has produced in over a year because of the granola bars," Sloane said. "Because of you," Voss said. The room was quiet. "I want to make you a proposition," he said. Sloane had been waiting for this. She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Theo doesn't really know me. I'm a person who gave your son snacks in a hallway." "I know," Voss said, "which is why I'm asking instead of telling." He opened the folder on the table in front of him. "Your grandmother's current treatment is being managed by the hospital's general oncology team. The outcome statistics for her specific diagnosis under general management are—" He paused. "Not good." Sloane's jaw tightened. "I know her statistics. Dr. Harriet Odell is the leading specialist in Canada for this particular cancer. She's at McGill. She has a 6-month wait list and a private rate of $900 per consultation, not including treatment." He turned the folder to face her. It had Dr. Odell's information, and below it, a second sheet, an outstanding balance summary, her grandmother's account, Sloane's own student loan information, 3 months of overdue rent. "That's private information," Sloane said very quietly. "Yes," Voss said with no change in tone. "You had someone pull my financial records." "I had someone retrieve your financial records," he confirmed. "I'm aware of the distinction and I acknowledge it's a violation of your privacy. I'm telling you directly because I think you'd find it more offensive if I pretended I hadn't." Sloane looked at the folder, at her grandmother's name, at the number beside it. "What do you want?" she said. It came out flat. "I want Theo to have someone who is not paid to be near him," Voss said. "Someone he chose. You are the only person he has chosen in 14 months. I want you to come and be his companion. His person. Someone who is in his day, who takes him to school and brings him home and sits with him and doesn't require him to perform wellness he doesn't feel." He paused. "Your grandmother would be moved tonight to a private suite. Dr. Odell would take her case on as a personal favor. Every bill would be cleared, every future expense covered. And if I say no," Sloane said, "then I drive you to your shift tomorrow," he said. And none of this conversation happened. "Your grandmother's situation remains what it is. I find another solution for Theo that is less effective." He closed the folder. "I'm not threatening you, Miss Mercer. I want to be clear about that. I have enough leverage in this city that I don't need to. I'm asking because you are genuinely the best option my son has, and I am." Something moved across his face, not accustomed to having options this narrow. Sloane thought about Nana Bete, 4 floors up, who had raised her after her parents left and never made her feel the weight of that, who smelled of rosewater and old paperbacks, and who was currently losing weight at a rate that terrified Sloane every time she hugged her. She thought about Theo's notebook and his formal nod and his granola bar held in 2 hands like something worth being careful with. She said, "I need to see my grandmother first." "Of course," Voss said. He stood, "I'll wait." The house was outside the city, which Sloane hadn't expected. She'd imagined a Westmount mansion, the kind she walked past sometimes and tried not to feel class-conscious about. Instead, Voss's home was 40 minutes north of the island, past Laval, and into a stretch of wooded Laurentian landscape that Sloane associated with ski chalets and people who could afford to be cold recreationally. The property emerged from a private road flanked by snow-thick spruce trees. The house was not as aggressively large as she'd feared. It was long and low-slung, stone and timber, built into the hillside so that it seemed to grow from the landscape rather than having been imposed on it. Modern inside, she learned, but the kind of modern that cost enough money to feel warm. Heated floors, windows that took up entire walls, a kitchen that smelled of whatever Mrs. Renault had made for dinner, something with rosemary and garlic that made Sloane's empty stomach pull. Theo stood at the bottom of the stairs when they arrived. He was in his pajamas, which were dark blue and also pressed, because apparently even sleepwear in this house had standards. He looked at his father, then at Sloane, then at the bag she was carrying. She'd been allowed to stop at her apartment briefly to pack. He pointed at the bag, raised his eyebrows. "I'm staying for a while," she said, "if that's okay with you." He considered this. Then he turned and went back upstairs and she heard his door close, and then, after a moment, open again. His head appeared over the railing. He pointed down the hall, showing her where her room was. Her room was more space than she'd had in years. She spent 20 minutes sitting on the edge of the bed trying to understand the last 8 hours of her life. The next morning, she found Theo in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. He was sitting at the island with his notebook, drawing. When she came in, he pushed it slightly toward her without looking up. An invitation, not a command. She sat down across from him and poured coffee from the pot Mrs. Renault had left on a timer, and they sat in the grey pre-dawn light of the Laurentians and didn't speak, and it was the most comfortable Sloane had felt in months. She learned the house in layers. The east side was hers and Theo's. His room, her room, a small study Mrs. Renault had set up for Theo's schoolwork. The west side was Voss's territory, his office, his private rooms, and by unspoken mutual agreement she didn't go there. She learned the staff, Mrs. Renault, who was 61 and Quebecoise, and whose assessment of Sloane shifted from cool professional courtesy to guarded warmth over the course of about a week, benchmarked by whether Sloane ate the meals she prepared. A groundskeeper named Pavel, who was almost completely silent and who had cleared her car's snow before she'd noticed it needed doing. 2 security personnel who worked rotating shifts. A younger man called Bennett, who was chatty in the way people are when they're professionally required not to be, and an older one called Marsh, who was not chatty in any way at all. She did not learn Voss himself. Not in those early weeks. He was present in the house the way gravity is present, felt rather than seen. He left early. He returned late. At dinner, which was apparently a non-negotiable household event, regardless of schedule, he sat at the head of the table and asked Theo questions that required no verbal answer. Questions Theo could respond to with a nod or a headshake or a pointed finger, and he appeared to have constructed an entire private language for his son over 14 months. It was both impressive and a little heartbreaking. Sloane sat across from Theo and was careful not to talk too much and careful not to talk too little, and gradually the texture of the meals changed. Theo started eating. Not always a full plate, but more than the performed moving food around she recognized from the nursing home meals she'd managed. He started looking up when she spoke. Occasionally, very occasionally, he answered her rhetorical questions with the notebook, quick small drawings that she'd learned to read. One evening she found a drawing on her pillow, a stick figure in scrubs carrying a coffee cup standing next to a stick figure in pajamas. Stars again, and below it in careful block letters, "Not alone." She photographed it and sent it to Nana Bet, who was doing better, genuinely better, in the way that Dr. Odell had made sound plausible in a way the general team never had. Nana Bet called back and said, in the voice she used when she had decided something, "He's a good boy, that one." "He is," Sloane agreed. "What about the father? That's complicated." "Everything worth anything is complicated," Nana Bet said. "Eat something, Sloaney. You sound thin." The complication with the father arrived, as complications often do, in the middle of the night. Sloane had been at the house for 5 weeks. She'd developed insomnia of the functional kind. She slept, but briefly and shallowly, which was why she was in the kitchen at 2 a.m. pouring a glass of water when she heard the door to the storage room at the end of the service corridor close with a soft, deliberate click. It was the kind of sound that shouldn't happen at 2 a.m. in a house with a security system Marsh had explained was sufficiently sophisticated that it monitored the property in 30-second intervals. She shouldn't have investigated. She knew this. She was a nursing aide from Montreal, not an operative, but she'd also grown up in a neighborhood where you developed instincts about wrong sounds, and every one of those instincts was firing. She padded down the service corridor and pushed the door open. It wasn't storage. It was a monitoring room. 4 screens, the blue-gray of live feeds, The front gate, the driveway, the kitchen, and the hallway outside Theo's room. She recognized the hallway from the angle. She could see her own door at the edge of the frame. On the wall beside the monitor, taped crookedly, was a page from a moleskin notebook. She recognized Theo's drawings immediately. He drew with the same careful deliberateness he applied to everything, but this drawing was different from the ones he'd left for her. This one was in thick black strokes, pressured hard into the paper. A car, and around the car, reaching lines that she understood immediately to be fire. A figure lying outside the car, covered in red cross-hatching. And standing some distance from the burning car, a figure with its arm raised. The arm ending in a detail she had to lean close to see in the monitor's blue light. A mark on the wrist, thick lines radiating out from a central point. A tattoo, she realized. He'd drawn a tattoo. A floorboard in the corridor shifted. Sloane spun. Lucian Voss was standing in the doorway. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket, which was the least dressed she had ever seen him. He looked at the monitor screens. He looked at Sloane. He looked at the drawing she hadn't realized she'd taken off the wall and was holding in both hands. His face was controlled stone. "I told Bennett to have this room secured," he said. His voice was very quiet. "The door wasn't locked," Sloane said. Her own voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "No," he said, "it wasn't." He stepped into the room. He was close enough now that she could see the tension in his jaw, the feathering muscle. "What do you think you're looking at?" "A drawing Theo made," Sloane said. "Of a car fire, someone lying outside it, and someone standing nearby with a tattoo on their wrist. Not a ring this time, a mark he saw on someone's wrist." Voss was very still. "His mother died in a car fire," Sloane said. "Yes," Voss said. "He was there, yes, and he saw someone." She held up the drawing. "Someone who didn't help. Someone who was there before your people arrived. Someone with this on their wrist." The silence was a physical weight. "My wife was targeted," Voss said. "The device was sophisticated. Military grade. It required someone with both the technical knowledge and the access to our route and schedule." His jaw tightened. "It was not an outside operation. It was someone inside my organization who provided the information and the window." Sloane lowered the drawing. "You don't know who?" "I know what Theo drew," Voss said. "And I know that he gave that drawing to you, not to me, because—" Something shifted in his expression, a fracture in the stone that was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Because he thinks I'll be angry. He thinks I'll blame him for not saying something sooner. And I have told him 100 times in 100 ways that I don't. But he is 7 years old, and he watched his mother die, and he can't say the words back to me." Sloane looked at the drawing in her hands. "He's been showing you," she said. "In the notebook. The things he can't say, yes," Voss said. "Then let me ask him," Sloane said. "Carefully. The way I do, he'll show me what he saw. And then you'll know." Voss looked at her. His eyes were very dark in the monitor light, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like a man who didn't have a plan for the next 30 seconds. "You don't understand what you're asking to be involved in," he said. "I understand what Theo needs," Sloane said. "That's what I'm here for." A long moment passed. He reached out, not quickly, and took the drawing from her hands. His fingers brushed hers. She registered it the way you register a static shock. Specific, surprising, gone. "Go back to bed," he said. "Lock your paws." "Please," the please delivered in that controlled voice landed differently than she expected. The next afternoon, she and Theo were in the sunroom off the east wing. Mrs. Renault had filled it with snake plants and a small citrus tree that smelled of growing things against the February frost pressing the windows. They were doing what they often did. Sloane talking in a low, easy stream while Theo drew, a conversation conducted on 2 frequencies that had, over weeks, started to sync. "You know what I noticed," Sloane said, not looking at him, straightening a plant pot, "is that I've never been good at drawing people. Faces especially. I always mess up the eyes." She paused. "You're really good at details, though, I noticed." Theo kept drawing. "Like hands," Sloane said. "You get those right. I always forget how complicated hands are." She waited. "You know, like when someone has something on their hands, a mark or a watch or—" She glanced at him carefully. "Or a tattoo." Theo's pen stopped. He looked at her, those grey, calculating eyes that she'd learned to read, and what she read in them was, "I know what you're doing." She looked back steadily. "I saw the drawing in the other room," she said. "I found it by accident, but I saw it, and I think you put it there because you wanted someone to find it, didn't you?" Theo put down his pen. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he reached into his notebook and tore out a blank page. He picked up his pen, and he drew. It took 4 minutes. He was precise and unhurried, and when he turned the page to face her, Sloane looked at it with the focused attention she'd learned to apply to his work. A tattoo, detailed. An overlapping angular design that she would later learn was a specific insignia, a northern bird in stylized geometric lines, rendered in a style she'd seen in certain Quebec artistic traditions. Below it on the page, Theo had written two things. The first was a letter, initial only. The second was a time, 6:47 a.m., the same time the accident had been reported, 14 minutes before the first fire crew had arrived on the scene. Sloane kept her face very still. She reached out and touched Theo's hand. "You did the right thing," she said. Theo looked at her. Something in him shifted. Not collapsing, releasing, like a breath held for 14 months. He opened his mouth. "I was scared," he said. His voice was small and rough from disuse, and it was the most complete sentence Sloane had ever heard in her life. What followed was fast and loud, and not a story Sloane fully understood until it was over. Voss moved through his own house with a focused, quiet efficiency that she recognized, in retrospect, as a man who had been waiting a very long time to move in a specific direction. There were phone calls made in other rooms. Bennett appeared, then two other men she hadn't seen before. Marsh went somewhere and came back different, tighter in the shoulders, with the particular energy of someone given permission to stop waiting. There was a man on Voss's staff whose first name began with the initial Theo had written. He was not a violent man, from what Sloane could observe. He was the kind of man who was so ordinary in his demeanor that he existed in peripheral vision. Which was perhaps the point. She didn't ask what happened to him. She decided, standing in the sunroom with Theo's hand in hers and the citrus tree in the February light, that this was a line she would draw around herself. She would know what she needed to know, and she would not go looking for the rest. When Voss returned to the East Wing, he was composed and his coat was pristine, and Sloane noted both of these things and chose not to examine them closely. He came to stand in the doorway of the sunroom. He looked at Theo. He looked at Sloane. He looked at his son's hand in the hand of the woman who had arrived with a bag of granola bars and a grandmother with cancer, and no particular reason to be kind to anyone. "Theo," he said. Theo looked at his father. "Are you all right?" Theo considered this with characteristic seriousness. "Yes," he said. Voss went very still. It was only a second. Then he crossed the room and crouched in front of his son the way he had in the pediatric hallway, and he put his hand on Theo's face, and Theo leaned into it. He looked up at Sloane over Theo's head. "Thank you," he said. It was a quiet sentence in a quiet room, and it carried the weight of 14 months. 6 months later, the sunroom had acquired 2 more plants, a slightly oversized dog named Biscuit, who had arrived as a puppy and immediately identified Theo as his person, and a comfortable chair in the corner that had become Sloane's by accumulated occupation. Nana Bet had been to the house for dinner 3 times. The first time, she had assessed the house, assessed Voss, assessed the situation, and said to Sloane in the kitchen in rapid French-accented English, "He watches you when you're not looking." Sloane had said, "I know." Nana Bet had patted her hand and gone to find Theo and his dog. It was a Sunday in August, the Laurentian summer turning the property gold and green outside the sunroom windows. Theo was reading on the window seat with Biscuit's head in his lap. He was reading aloud to the dog in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who didn't need an audience to respond, just to be present. Sloane was in her chair with coffee and the crossword, which she was losing. Voss came into the room. He had stopped asking if he was interrupting. She had stopped feeling like he was. He sat down beside a chair, not in a chair of his own. On the arm of hers, a proximity she'd registered the first time and had since decided to let mean what it meant. 7 across, he said, looking at her crossword. Resolute. 8 letters. I know what resolute means, she said. You had staunch, he said. Staunch fits. The 3rd letter is O, he said. She looked at it. Steadfast, she said. Steadfast, he agreed. Across the room, Theo looked up from his book. He observed them with those grey eyes that had stopped calculating somewhere around month 4 and started simply seeing. He looked at Biscuit. He looked back at them. He picked up his notebook from the seat beside him and tore out a page. He held it up without getting up, showing them. It was 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, a small one, and a lopsided dog. Their hands connected in a chain. Below it, in Theo's careful block letters, still here. Sloane looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the granola bar. About 11 days of $3 purchases in a building that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. About a boy with a notebook and a nod that knew how to be a whole language. She looked at Voss. He was already looking at her. Still here, she said.